The biggest fighting game tournament in the world, EVO, almost died overnight in 2020. Publishers pulled out, sponsors disappeared, the brand turned toxic in public. But the real story isn't the scandal, it's the fragile structure EVO was built on. Because Evolution Championship Series wasn't just a tournament, it was a company, a once-a-year machine running on trust, forward money, and a surprisingly thin core. Who built it? Who held the keys? How the founders lost their grip? And how the crown jewel of the fighting game community became sellable. So in this episode, I'm going to show you how EVO was built on ice and look at the business history that made the Saudi takeover possible. Let's rewind for a second, because the EVO most people know today is the Vegas version. Huge ballrooms, thousands of players, publishers watching closely, top players flying in from all over the world. It looks like a massive machine now, but it really didn't start that way. At the beginning, EVO was built by 4 people: Tom Cannon, Tony Cannon, Seth Killian, Joey Coella. If you dig into the early history of the fighting game community, those 4 names come up constantly. And the important thing to understand right away is that they weren't all doing the same job. Each of them filled a different role. Once you see that structure, the whole story starts to make a lot more sense. Start with Tom and Tony Cannon. The Cannon brothers came out of Northern California. Both of them studied computer science at Stanford. That detail ends up mattering a lot, because the way the brothers approached the fighting game scene was very different than most players. Most people saw tournaments, they saw competition. The Cannon brothers saw systems, infrastructure, ways to organize the chaos.
And the home of this year's B3. Welcome to B3.
You see that mindset in everything that they go on to build later. GGPO, Radiant Entertainment, even the later work at Riot Games. They were always thinking about the underlying structure of the scene, and EVO ends up being one of the first major things where that mindset shows up. But EVO wasn't the only thing they built. Around the same time, the Cannon brothers were also involved in creating something else that became just as important to the fighting game community: Shoryuken.com, SRK. If you played fighting games seriously in the early 2000s, SRK was unavoidable. It was the central hub of the entire scene. Tournament announcements, strategy discussions, regional rivalries playing out in the forum threads, players posting match footage and arguing about techniques. Sure, it sounds extremely outdated now in the YouTube age, but at that time it was transformative. Because the fighting game community was still very much fragmented. Arcade scenes were local ecosystems. Northern California had its own players, Southern California had its own, the East Coast had its own, Europe and Asia also had their own scenes. And everyone believed their region had the strongest competitors, but there was no consistent way to prove it. If you were the best in your arcade, that didn't necessarily mean anything outside of your city. SRK helped connect those scattered groups together. Players from different regions could suddenly talk to each other, argue, compare results, plan travel to tournaments. In a lot of ways, SRK became the communication layer of the early fighting game community. And that matters for EVO, because tournaments only work if players are willing to travel. If players in New York and California don't even know that each other exist, there is no reason for them to meet in the same bracket. SRK helped create that shared ecosystem. Now let's talk about Seth Killian. Seth's role in the early scene was different from the Cannons. He wasn't primarily building infrastructure, he was embedded directly in the competitive side of the community. A respected player, a commentator, someone who understood the culture of the scene from the inside. That matters when you're trying to create something like EVO, because tournaments don't gain legitimacy from organizers, they gain legitimacy from players. If the competitive community respects the event, it grows. If they don't, it dies. Seth helped bridge that gap. He was someone that the players trusted.
Hard not
James,
to get emotional.
we should have like instead of a staring contest, we can have a crying contest. We'll just talk about EVO until one of us cries. Cry. I think James is going to say it all for me tonight. I didn't do it this time. Give it up for James. Bring it in, James. I love you, man. I love you. We'll see you next year.
Then there is Joey Coella. Joey's role becomes one of the most important in the entire story because Joey was the operator, the person actually running the tournament. Now that might sound simple, but anyone who has actually organized even a small tournament knows how chaotic that can be. Venues, equipment, player registration, bracket management, schedules, making sure that hundreds of matches happen without collapsing. That's logistics. And logistics is where most events fail. Joey became the person holding that side of the operation together. If the cannons helped build the structure, Joey was the one running the machine. Before EVO existed, there was another tournament that helped lay the foundation, Battle by the Bay. Battle by the Bay begins in 1996. At the time, it's one of the first attempts to bring top fighting game players together from different regions. Remember the context. This is the late 1990s. Online play doesn't exist yet. If you want to prove that you're good, you have to do it in person. So tournaments become the only reliable way to settle rivalries. Battle by the Bay starts small, but it introduces something important. Structure, organized brackets, regional players traveling to compete. It's the early prototype of what EVO eventually becomes. Over the next few years, the tournament grows. More players start showing up, word spreads throughout the arcades and through SRK, and eventually the organizers decide to push the idea further. That's where the Evolution Championship Series begins. The first official EVO tournament happens in 2002 and it takes place at UCLA. Now here's an important detail. The founders pulled around $10,000 together to make that event happen. $10,000 might not sound huge today, but for a grassroots tournament in the early 2000s, that was real money. It meant the organizers were taking a financial risk. They had to secure venue space, set up equipment, coordinate travel and logistics, all before they even knew exactly how many players would actually show up. That's the moment that EVO stops being a community gathering and starts becoming something else, an event operation. Now this is where the business side of the story really starts to matter, because every event runs on a financial model. You still have to pay for venues, manage equipment, handle registrations. EVO's early model was actually pretty straightforward. Players paid entry fees. Those entry fees helped fund the event itself. If enough players registered, the tournament covered its costs and could happen again the following year. If registrations dropped too low, the entire event would be in danger. That's the loop. But here's another piece of the system. Most players registered for EVO well before the event actually happened, sometimes months in advance. That means money was coming in before the tournament took place. Those early registrations helped fund the logistics of running the event, venue deposits, planning costs, equipment arrangement. In other words, EVO was partially funded by its own attendees. That's a common structure in the events industry. Conventions use it, festivals use it, early ticket sales help finance the event itself. For years, EVO kept growing. And that growth started becoming obvious in the mid-2000s. More players, more international competitors, more attention from game publishers. Then something big happens in 2006. EVO begins receiving official recognition from Capcom. That is huge, because Street Fighter is the backbone of the fighting game genre. When the publisher of the most important fighting game franchise starts treating your tournament as legitimate, the entire scene notices. It also signals something. This isn't just a grassroots event anymore, it's becoming the central stage for the competitive fighting games. Once other publishers start paying attention, the stakes change, because now the tournament is part of the industry's ecosystem. Developers start watching how their games perform on the EVO stage, competitive scenes start forming around games featured in the lineup, and EVO begins to influence which fighting games get taken seriously. At this point, the train is starting to move full steam. The event is growing year after year. Players start traveling internationally. Japanese competitors begin showing up in large numbers. EMEA players travel from overseas. Suddenly, EVO isn't just a regional tournament anymore. It's now a global one. And as that happens, the scale of the event keeps increasing. Small venues stop being enough. The tournament moves into a larger convention spaces. Eventually, it lands in Las Vegas. And that move changes everything. Las Vegas means hotel ballrooms, thousands of competitors, spectators filling entire convention floors. Now, EVO just isn't a tournament anymore. It's an event weekend, an annual gathering for the entire fighting game community. But larger venues also mean larger costs. Let's be honest, convention space isn't cheap. Running an event of that size requires far more equipment, more setups, more staff, more coordination. Every year the financial risk grows. And this is the point where EVO stops looking like a scene tournament and starts looking like a real event property. Because once the event lands in Las Vegas, the scale changes quickly.
Vegas is always enjoyable to come to, and I always like to fly in at night because it's really cool when you fly in and you can just see, like, it's all dark and then you can just see the lights of Las Vegas. It's like a jewel in the darkness.
There's so much to do. There's a lot to see. You can go shopping, do whatever, but everybody's here for EVO. That's the only reason I'm here, EVO.
The Mandalay Bay years are where that change become extremely obvious.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to EVO 2016 Fighting Game World Championship here at the Mandalay Bay Event Center in beautiful Las Vegas. And now it's time for the main event, Street Fighter 5!
You suddenly have thousands of competitors, production crews, publisher booths, broadcast setups, and entire convention floors filled with setups. And that scale brings something else with it: real money. By the mid-2010s, EVO wasn't just running on a couple of guys and some arcade cabinets anymore. Production crews, venue contracts, stage builds, streaming infrastructure. The budget for the event had already climbed into the millions of dollars. You could also see the shift in how the outside world started treating EVO. ESPN began covering the event.
You're 63 years old. How did you get into this?
I'm having the time of my life here. The scene here is just surreal. The tension, the passion, the excitement. They're having all kinds of championships. There are thousands, countless thousands of people that have come from all over the world to Las Vegas. We're all staying at the Mandalay Bay. The first 2 days of the EVO Tournament 2016 were held just across the way at the Las Vegas Convention Center. But today, everybody has come in here to the arena at the Mandalay Bay. Not a ticket to be had. We've been here since 7:30 this morning. Wow. We already went through the Mortal Kombat Championship. We went through the Marvel Championship. We're just finishing right now with Guilty Gear. Melee is next, and then Street Fighter is the finale at 10 p.m. Eastern. That's 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. PST on ESPN2.
Publishers started treating EVO as the main stage for competitive fighting games. As the event itself becomes larger and more complicated, more of the operational responsibility flows towards Joey. Over time, Joey Coelho becomes the CEO of EVO. That title is important because it reflects how the organization has evolved. At the beginning, EVO was essentially a founder-driven grassroots tournament, but as it grows into a global event, someone has to become responsible for the operation. Joey becomes that person in official capacity. From the outside, EVO looks like a massive success story. The biggest fighting game tournament in the world, players treating it like a pilgrimage, crowds filling convention halls.
This event is ridiculous. There's a reason it is hyped as the biggest fighting game tournament of all time.
And this venue is huge. It's the biggest venue I've ever been at, right? It's a convention center. I've seen cons that are in smaller buildings. It's really impressive the amount of people that are here. And a lot of people that came out for Tekken to support the release for a game that's not even out.
So throughout this entire weekend, we have the biggest Tekken 7 tournament in North America. You're gonna have hundreds of people from all over the world, from many different countries, battling out to see who's gonna be the top dog, who's gonna be the champion here for Tekken 7.
Now here's the part that most people outside of the scene never really saw. Even as EVO kept growing, the operation behind it stayed surprisingly lean. A small core team, invaluable volunteers, a lot of long-standing relationships, and a surprising amount of trust. People used to joke that the whole thing ran on wizard magic. That nickname came from Joey Coelho's longtime tag, Mr. Wizard. But the joke wasn't completely wrong. A lot of structure was relationship driven, handshake agreements, publisher trust built over years, the same small group handling the event year after year. For a once-a-year event business, that can work. When people trust you, registrations keep coming in, sponsors keep showing up, publishers keep bringing games. As long as the machine keeps moving, the model holds. But the bigger the event becomes, the more pressure that small structure has to carry. And don't forget the unsung volunteers who give up their own time to make sure that this whole thing comes together. For a long time, that system works. The community keeps showing up, the tournament keeps expanding, EVO becomes the crown jewel of the competitive fighting games. Years later, the Cannon brothers will talk about this period much more openly. In a later interview, they described EVO as something that had reached its limits of organic growth.
One of the things that's been clear for us for a long time is that we're sort of hitting an inflection point of organic growth. Like Tom talked about 20 years of organic growth, and EVO is like one of the most cherished esports events for the fighting game community. But it's really big. It's so big that it's hard to do an excellent job at everything you want to do on sort of borrowed time, everyone's favorite side project, right? And I think through the years, there have been times where I think we didn't meet my expectation of ways where we could have done better, and we'd been thinking about how do we bring on a really strong partner that could just bring a level of sophistication and maturity to the scene.
That matters because for years the event had grown naturally, more players, more games, more attention. But the structure behind it is still much closer to a community institution rather than a fully professional esports company. And that's fine when the event is smaller and expectations are a lot lower. But once you start drawing thousands of players, major publishers, big media, global attention, that same setup starts carrying a lot more weight. In that same conversation with James Chen, Ultra David and Tupperware, the Cannon brothers admit that there were years where EVO didn't always meet their own expectations. And that pressure is going to matter later in the story, because eventually that system that helped EVO grow is also the system that makes it vulnerable. Let's pause for a moment, because here's the part that most people miss. EVO wasn't just a tournament, it was a company. On stream you see EVO as a weekend festival, on brackets you see EVO as a tournament, but in business terms, that thing that exists on paper is Triple Perfect. Triple Perfect is the legal box that holds all of EVO's assets, the name, the brand, the relationships, the rights. In the original filings for Triple Perfect Inc., the officers and directors were the founders. Tom Cannon was president and director, Tony Cannon was secretary, treasurer and director, Joey Coelho was director. So when we say EVO sold, we're not talking about a vibe. We're talking about a real corporate shell with named officers holding the asset. When people talk about EVO sold to Sony, what actually changes hands isn't the smell of the ballroom or the Daigo Parry clip. It's the assets sitting inside Triple Perfect. We don't have exact profit and loss sheets for Triple Perfect Inc., But what we do know is that the founders and Joey used Triple Perfect as the corporate wrapper for EVO. The event's business life ran through that company, and when things get ugly in the 2020s, that company is the one that ends up holding the blast. Keep that image of Triple Perfect catching the blast radius in the back of your mind for a moment, because it explains why the next few moves look the way they do. So even before any scandal, you already had two problems: a scale problem, the event is bigger than the skeleton carrying it; a concentration problem, too much of that skeleton is tied to Joey, and that second one is the one that detonates everything. In July 2020, serious allegations come out against Joey Coella. We covered that extensively in the previous episode, but this is about what it actually did to the business itself. The public face and CEO of the company being accused of misconduct with a minor wasn't just devastating to the business, it was also devastating to the entire scene. Publishers looked at that and did exactly what any risk-adverse brand would do. They pulled out. Capcom, Bandai Namco, NetherRealm, they all stepped back. EVO Online was cancelled, sponsors bailed. The biggest stage in fighting games suddenly becomes radioactive. If you remember earlier, we talked about how EVO's model relied heavily on forward confidence. In 2020, that trust evaporates overnight. So what does that actually look like inside Triple Perfect? You go from a company carrying big venue and production expectations to a company with the main event cancelled, the CEO removed, and partners backing away in public. That's not a rough year. That's equivalent to organ failure. The old machine is completely broken. Joey-centric's operating model is no longer viable. Publisher confidence is dented. The community is angry and hurt. And the company that actually holds the EVO's assets suddenly looks way less stable than it did 12 months before. This is where Tony Cannon is brought back into the CEO role.
So we immediately shifted to, let's get to the bottom of this and clean up our own house, essentially. And so we've gone through the process, which is now complete, of completely separating, Joey from EVO. So he's no longer participating in the company in any way whatsoever.
Yeah, he was obviously integral to planning and running EVO, and had, my understanding at least is that he had been taking the lead on that for quite some time. How was it for you guys in not just the sort of emotional side of having somebody who did this kind of stuff, but in not having this third team member anymore? It's just you two.
The messaging at the time focuses on two things: cleaning house and rebuilding trust. But if you zoom out, there's a third job sitting there quietly in the background: stabilize the asset. Because if the brand dies here, 25 years of history die with it, and the people who've been working on this thing for decades are left with nothing but memories and a dead corporate shell. Now, one big question that comes up is this: after the 2020 apocalypse, were the founders genuinely trying to rebuild EVO, or were they dragging a wounded brand to the market so that someone else could take the risk off their hands? In other words, was the Sony and RTS deal a growth move, or was it a rescue mission?
I think in Sony, we found a partner who recognized that what we had was unique in esports and magical, and we really understood it, and they were interested in coming in to amplify it and take it to the next level, right? And provide the benefits that they provide as a very large company that's already super invested in fighting games, right? Like Sony is a really good platform for running.
But I think reality, as usual, tends to be a lot messier. When you listen to the canons talk about that post-scandal period, what you hear is not some slick merger and acquisition pitch. You hear people describing a crisis. They talk about having to step back in, clean up, rebuild. They talk about the weight of carrying something that had grown way beyond its original scope. Do they frame the Sony deal as a positive step? I mean, of course they do. But buried inside those interviews is an admission that the way EVO was being run was not sustainable anymore. So the fairest way to read it is as this: Triple Perfect is holding a very valuable brand that has just taken a huge hit. The founders are trying to preserve that value, protect the staff, and make sure that the event doesn't disappear. Selling the assets is the lever that solves all of that in one shot. It's neither pure good or pure evil, but it makes practical business decision in a very horrible situation. So let's freeze the board at the moment that the deal happens. March 2021, Sony Interactive Entertainment and a new company called RTS announced that they have jointly acquired the EVO assets. On paper, that means Triple Perfect is no longer the long-term home of EVO. Its crown jewels are being moved into a joint venture structure between Sony and RTS. From the outside, the big headline reads very clean: PlayStation Plus esports company save EVO. From the inside, what you actually have is this: a distressed but culturally priceless brand, a founder shell that has hit its limits, and a new ownership structure that sits above the old world entirely. Why does Sony make sense? Because they bring platform reach, mainstream comfort, and brand safety. If you are a publisher or a sponsor, hearing Sony is now above this immediately calms your nerves. Why does RTS make any sense? Because somebody has to operate this thing day to day at a higher level than the founder plus friends plus volunteer model. RTS is built to be that machine, a formal events and production company with people used to running large esports organizations. But a move like that always comes with a bill, and in this case, that bill gets paid by the old model. There's a line you hear a lot when people talk about EVO. This thing was built by the community, and that's true. But after the Sony and RTS deal, it's no longer being run like a community side project. This is the point where the old structure starts getting gutted. So what does that gutting actually look like? First, roles change. Tom and Tony Cannon move into more advisory roles and high-level seats. Their names still carry weight, but they're no longer the ones signing the checks and building staffing spreadsheets for every department. And that's important because influence is not the same thing as control. Second, a formal management layer is built on top of the event. This is where RTS start bringing in their people. And it's why we can't just say RTS and move on. You need to actually see the humans because their CVs tell you what kind of machine EVO has become. Let's start at the visible operating level. Rick Thayer. If you're from the FGC, you might already know that name. If you're not, here's the short version. Rick is the long-term organizer behind Combo Breaker, one of the best run majors in the world. He also has experience on the product side of Twitch. So when he's announced as the general manager of EVO, that is not a random LinkedIn hire, it's a very deliberate choice. Someone who has already proven that they can run a complex FGC event, someone who understands streaming and platform needs, someone the scene recognizes as one of us, not a faceless suit. Rick is the clearest sign of what professionalization looks like when it's done with at least some respect for the culture. Corporate structure on top, real scene experience on the ground. Then you have Mark Julio, Markman. If you've been around fighting game tournaments for more than 5 minutes, you've probably seen this man somewhere. He was the public face of Mad Catz during the golden age of arcade sticks. He worked closely with Bandai Namco. He's been on commentary, on stage, on the business side, and behind the scenes. In other words, he's not just some random business development title parachuted in for press releases. He's someone that has been deeply embedded in the ecosystem for years. They're once again hiring someone who doesn't just understand the business, but also understands the politics of tournaments, hardware manufacturers, and every aspect of the ecosystem. Now lift your eyes one step up. Above Rick and Mark, you have the RTS executive layer. Names like Stuart Saw and Kim Pham start to appear. Stuart Saw is the CEO of RTS, with his background that runs through Twitch, Endeavor, and large-scale live events. So he isn't thinking in terms of how do we get enough volunteers for pools, he's thinking in terms of media rights, partnership structures, and long-term event portfolios. Kim Pham has a similar profile. Years of experience in major esports and events organizations, serious operational pedigree, not "I used to run locals in a basement." Between both of them, you now have a layer of management sitting between the EVO brand that you see on stream and the capital that actually owns it. At this point, EVO has fully exercised its bedroom project DNA. They've brought in a proper events company, you've built a management chain, and you stabilized the asset. From the ground, it looks completely different. The old EVO machine was built on long relationships, informal decision making, and a core that had been doing this together for decades. People who had started as volunteers became department heads because they had been there through the years. Post-sale, a lot of that gets stripped out or moved sideways. Processes replace favors. Organizational charts replace who's been here the longest. Reports and budgets replace "I know a guy who can fix this for us." Some of the old guards stay on in different capacities, some leave. Some hang in the orbit but no longer have the same say that they once did in the past. For the purposes of this episode, the point isn't to assign moral points. It's to show that the first real power shift doesn't happen when the Saudi capital arrives. It happens here. This is the moment EVO stops being a founder-run event and becomes a managed property inside a larger corporate structure. Tom and Tony are still on stage.
And now Tick is here to present them with the key to the city.
Thank you so much. On behalf of Clark County, the sports capital of the world, we have the Super Bowl down the road, we have F1 up the road, we have every other sport, but EVO is the most important sport we have. Thank you so much.
I'll agree with that.
Rick and Mark are still recognizable FGC faces, but the real authority now sits a step higher, in the RTS and Sony layer. If you want a physical symbol of all of this, look at the venue map. Old EVO is ballrooms, hotel function spaces, and a casino arena that it grows into with lots of sweat and favors. New EVO is the Las Vegas Convention Center. The jump is not just cosmetic. Convention halls come with strict union rules, heavier labor costs, more complex logistics, and sponsor expectations that match the scale of the room. You don't run that with a couple of founders and a spreadsheet. You need production teams, venue managers, HR, legal, finance, all of the boring stuff that never appears on stream but absolutely controls whether the event lives or dies. That's the world that Sony and RTS drag EVO into. On camera, it still looks like a celebration of fighting games. Off camera, it's operating like a mid to large size scale live event business sitting inside of a corporate portfolio. Which is exactly why the next ownership moves. NODWIN stepping in, RTS changing hands, Qiddiya absorbing the whole thing are all possible at all. Because once you have a brand that's operating at that scale, inside of that kind of structure, it stops being the founders tournament and it becomes an asset on the balance sheet that can be moved from one owner to another. For now, the key point is this: by the time the Saudi-backed capital take full control, the soul versus sovereign fight that people love to argue about online has already had its most important round. And that had nothing to do with the Saudis. The old EVO machine broke in 2020. The sale to Sony and RTS rebuilt it in a new shape. And that rebuild came with a cost. The founders shifted into advisory roles and a formal management stack took over. That's where Alex Jabali comes into the story. Alex is the founder of CEO, Community Effort Orlando. CEO is not just some tiny regional thing. It's been a major pillar for years. It has its own identity, its own brand, its own audience. Now, here's the pivot.
just CEO Taku, CEO. I look forward to every EVO. You know, Rick, general manager here, is one of my best friends, and I'm excited that the opportunities he gets to make this an even better event with the team that is allowing him to do so. So, changing in the guard, you know, me and him 10 years ago, like, one day we're going to be running EVO in every event, and now I run all the DreamHack ESL, he runs EVO and has CEO and you know, so it's just amazing. So, but otherwise, love fighting games, man. They're the most passionate.
Alex publicly announces that he's officially on the EVO team as product manager for live events. He also lists it on his X profile. So what changed? He goes from guy running CEO to guy who runs CEO and is now inside the EVO Live's event structure. Here's why that matters. This is a different kind of hire. This is someone who already runs one of the major institutions outside of EVO. That's why I call it a tentacle. EVO is now an organism with many extensive tentacles. They can touch almost every aspect of the ecosystem. They absorb operators, people who already know how to do the work, people already have local credibility, people already have years of scars. But there is a huge danger to all of this. EVO is the top crown, but outside of EVO, there are many other big pillars. In the US, major weekends people usually plan around include Combo Breaker in Chicago, CEO in Florida, Frosty Faustings in Chicago during the winter. In the UK, you have VS Fighting by the Electronic Dojo team. Now pull that back. EVO brings Rick in, Combo Breaker's origin. EVO brings Alex in, CEO's origin. That is 2 operators connected to 2 major US pillars. If EVO is already doing this in the US, what happens when the expansion accelerates? Because the expansion is not just flights and banners. Expansion needs locals, and locals need operators. So the easiest move is to hire the best people on the ground floor. If EVO wants a stronger UK footprint, who do they call? Electronic Dojo. This is how an entire ecosystem gets pulled into a single operator with job offers. And then you see the same thing on the calendar. When you look at the calendar, CEO is usually held in June. In 2023, CEO is held June the 23rd to 25th. In 2024, CEO is held June the 28th to 30th. In 2025, CEO is held June the 13th to 15th. In 2026, CEO is now scheduled for August the 14th to 16th. EVO 2026 will now move to June 26th to 28th. Effectively, they have officially swapped dates. The bigger machine is now setting the rhythm and everyone else is starting to dance around it. Now push the camera out a little more, because the people are one part of the story, ownership is the other. And this is where NODWIN matters. Not because we need to repeat the whole Takeover story again, but because NODWIN proves something. It proves EVO is now tradable. Sony step out, another company can step in. Then that company can step out too. Founder-built events are not supposed to feel like that. Assets do. Who exactly are NODWIN? They are an Indian-based esports and gaming company. Serious in their region, serious about growth, serious about emerging markets. When they come in, the message is easy to understand. EVO is useful to them. EVO has reach. EVO can travel. EVO can be part of something bigger than Las Vegas. And that matters just as much, because the language around the exit is classic corporate language. Strategic realignment, focus on emerging markets, fiscal discipline, operational efficiency, return to EBITDA positive, revenue growth. None of this is the language of a community steward. That's the language of a company that is deciding where to place its capital. So at this point, Sony decides to stop being an owner and sell its stake to NODWIN Gaming. NODWIN becomes a major co-owner of EVO alongside RTS. Then Saudi Arabia steps into the fold. September 2025, Saudi Arabia enters. A massive Saudi-backed project called Qiddiya bought RTS, and since RTS owned a big price of EVO, the Saudi government became co-owner. In a massive power move, RTS, which had just been bought by Saudi-backed Qiddiya, buys out all of NODWIN's entire stake. The result, NODWIN is officially out as an owner. They made their money and they've left the keys to RTS and Qiddiya, who now owns 100% of EVO. EVO is not just sitting under an events operation anymore. It's now sitting inside a wider entertainment and development structure backed by sovereign money. Now let's zoom out. Who exactly sits above RTS in this new ownership structure? I want you to look one step above the RTS leadership team. Mohammed Al Dawood, Chief Strategy Officer at Qiddiya Investment Company. That title matters. It means someone is helping decide what EVO is for inside the bigger plan. And when he talks publicly, this is exactly how he talks about it. Long-term growth, respecting heritage, strengthening EVO's role in the global fighting game community. That is not how a local TO talks. This is how someone talks when they're placing an asset inside a long-range system. Then there's Abdullah Al Dawood, and this is where you really feel the scale shift. He's not just some fighting game old head. He's a banker, investor, executive with over 15 years in investment banking, including Deutsche Bank in the Middle East and North Africa region. He also holds major entertainment leadership roles, including 7. So when you hear that name, you should not be thinking arcade roots. You should be thinking capital, big money, entertainment infrastructure, boardroom power. So let me give you the full ladder. At the bottom, the visible event layer is Rick, Mark, and the people that the scene can see. Above that, you have the RTS leadership team, Stuart Saw, Kim Pham, and the people running the company that runs the event. Above that, Qiddiya strategy and oversight, Mohammed Al Dawood, Abdullah Al Dawood. And above even that is essentially sovereign-backed capital and a much wider entertainment project. That is the new chain. This is who really runs EVO now. So by the end of this, the question is no longer who founded EVO. And that matters, but it's not the main question anymore. The real question is, who has the power now? And the answer is no longer a handful of arcade pioneers. It is a layered chain of operators, executives, strategy people, and sovereign-backed capital sitting above the brand. That is what EVO became. Not just sold, transformed. The founders built it, Joey scaled it, Crysis shattered it, Sony and RTS rebuilt it, NODWIN proved it was tradable, Qiddiya turned it into part of a much bigger system. This is the business history, and once you see that clearly, the whole thing looks very different. And the question is simple. Was that the only way that the FGC survives at this scale? Or was that the moment that the scene stopped owning its own future?
You're done digging through EVO's past?
Yeah. Turns out Community Tournament was just a company on life support, changing owners every time it almost died.
That's how it works. The crowd remembers parries and pop-offs. The contracts remember who was holding the debt.
It just feels like the FGC was living in a story that stopped being true a very long time ago.
The story never had to be true. It just had to keep everyone showing up. You've seen who really kept the lights on now. No going back from that.
So what now? What do we do?
Now, you hit save, get some rest. We're done studying its past owners. Next time, we start tracking its sacrifices.